Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, whatever time you're listening to this. It's morning for you, Philip. I know you've just woken up. But my dear friends, money, yeah, Gewalt, what an entity, what a sensitive force to engage with, to speak about. And tonight we're going to try and launch into some very deep sources, giving us some understanding behind the mitzvah of charity, the mitzvah of tzedakah. Now, the question I really want to ask is, what is it there for? What is it there to achieve? And why is it so difficult to engage with? Why is money something such a sensitive aspect to an individual? What would you guys say? What's so sticky about the aspect of money? What do you say, Oli? You don't find it sensitive?
Speaking about it.
No, of course, speaking about it, and that's why we're here. We're going to speak about it. We're going to engage with it. But I think when it comes to being asked to give money, or to even when it comes to a scenario of thinking about giving money, it's something that some individuals thrive with, and they have the capacity to do so. Not only have the capacity to do so within themselves, within their psyche, they have the ability to do so. And again, we're not talking in terms of quantums here. Every individual, every human being, even the pauper on the street, has a capacity to give. Some people are of a giving nature, and some people struggle with that energy. And really, this question is something I want to try and understand together with you. Where is this schism? Where is the complexity? So all you think there's no complexity here. You're saying the conversation or the aspect of discussing it, you feel comfortable with. Fantastic. Excellent.
It's challenging to give away and store energy. Think of cash as really money, possession. It's really stored energy. It's things you invested in.
Nice. So Jesse's saying here you have an amassment of stored energy. Energy that what? You can use. What are you going to use it for? To buy goods and services. And I guess there's a question as to how much goods and services can one buy? And why, if one looks at the totality of the energy that they've stored up, why is there a prism within the Torah that says you must engage with giving of that energy to others? Now, we all understand when it comes to our relationship to ourselves, an individual that spends their entire focus of life on themselves is not necessarily going to be a very happy person. And the Torah tries to create a depth of experiencing life where obviously you have to look after yourself, but there's an expansivity of one's involvement with the energy. So I like that concept. One's stored and amassed energy. Let me ask you this. If an individual was given a credit card, and on the credit card was written endless amount, and you were given every single capacity to be able to spend on whatever you wanted to spend on, do you think that individual will feel a satiation when it comes to their relationship with money? What would you guys say? Endless ability to spend, endless ability to access, endless ability to engage. So when it comes to their relationship or the concept of money, if we were really to question, what is our relationship to money? Is it just an ability to use energy that's stored up to facilitate our experience of life? Or is there something deeper in our relationship to money?
There's always something.
Is that just because we're here at the deeper significance of Tuesdays, Transformative Tuesdays? Or are you saying that there is always something deep when it comes to this particular subject?
That comes from somewhere. Parents said, like some kind of overgiving, undergiving, hanging on. There's always everyone has a money.
Okay, everyone has some complexity psychologically in terms of their relationship to money. Okay, Steve?
But the reason with the car is it's a limited resource. it's theirs. It's theirs.
Okay, so Steve's saying it's limited and it's also difficult. If something is yours, why should I part with it? Now, the question is, how much does one need? Because if a person comes to the deduction that they need 10 and they have 100, do we then have a relationship to money in the sense that more than 10 is to some degree going to be extra, bonus?
Well, there's
Okay, so that's the big question. Where does that want to spend come from? And not only that, let's say again, we have a credit card where an individual is told you have endless ability to spend. So you have endless ability to satiate whatever fathomed needs one may have. Does that then still satiate a person's relationship to their money? Or in this scenario, not really their money. So the question really here, is this about means or is this about identity? Is this about an individual's ability to live in life and really engage with whatever types of services or elements that they want to pay for? Again, some identity there as well. Or is this all about a person's relationship to life and how they experience life, not because of what they can buy, but because of what they have? Yeah, it's a bit of both. Okay, so this is really to get us thinking. Let's have a look at some fascinating spaces. Before I tell you this, I'm going to share with you a story that's told from the Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone, anyone watched it before? So Twilight Zone tells us a story of a bank robber, but robbing a bank. And he's running away from the police that have found out about his escapade. And he's running, and they shoot him dead. He wakes up, comes into this environment, and he thinks, gewaldig, wow, everything's white. These beautiful individuals coming up to him, and they say to him, anything you want, it's yours. All you need to do is click your fingers. Twice, you get it. Amazing. He says to himself, they definitely made a mistake. This is the wrong spot. They mixed me up. Clicks his fingers, wants a palace, bang. Clicks his fingers, wants a banquet, bang. And days pass, and he gets every single thing he can dream of, clicking his fingers, and everything he wants, he gets. A few days pass, and he's thinking to himself, and he says, you know what? I'm not feeling this. Where's this excitement that I used to have? Where's the enjoyment that I used to have? So he clicks his fingers and he says to the malachim, to the angels, he says, I want to be given the opportunity to rob a bank again. Please, I miss it so much. Clicks his fingers, they give him the opportunity, but here all of the angels are standing, dressed up, as bank tellers, a few policemen, and everyone's, acting, facilitating, and everything doesn't have the same type of vibe that he's looking for. Comes to the bank teller, give me the money. Yes, sir, yes, gives and runs away. The policeman's running after him, but it's not really reaching him. He's sort of pretending to run after him. Eventually he stops, clicks his fingers. He finds himself back in the palace, in his room, and he looks for a way to escape. Comes to the door's locked. Comes to the window, starts to shake the window. He sees that the window's locked. And he turns around and he sees all of the angels converging upon him. And he starts screaming at them, saying, I want the other place. I want the other place. And they say to him, this is the other place. Now, an individual in that space, if you understand the story, gets a geschmack. They get a vibe. They get something out of achieving, out of investing, out of creating, out of amassing from themselves. So what we see from this story is that money is not only one's ability, not only the credit card that they're given potentially to be able to spend on whatever they want to spend on, but there's something to do with money where you've mentioned it's yours, but what is yours is the achievement of yours. Look what I have. Look at the castle that I've built. and look at the castle that I need to retain. Otherwise, let's have a look. Now, what is the requirement within that? How does one relate to that? So listen to this unbelievable Gemara. It's a Gemara in Bava Basra. The Gemara tells us, Tani Reb Yehuda Omer. Reb Yehuda said, Gedoyle tzedakah shemekareves ezagula. Unbelievable. You want to bring Mashiach, you want to bring redemption, give charity. What a great slogan. Yeah? You think it's going to affect anyone? Maybe a few cents, maybe a few dollars. You want to bring the geula, give charity. Shneimar, ko amar Hashem, shimru mishpat v'asu tzedakah. It says, Hashem, keep the commandments and give charity. Ki karoi v'yeshuas ilavoi v'tzidkasi legalis. Because my revelation and my redemption is close. Unbelievable. We see a beautiful connection between giving charity and bringing the redemption. Now, not very convincing at the moment, because what is going to convince us is an understanding from within. And let's try and understand what is the redemption, because what does it mean to be redeemed? How do you feel when you're redeemed? Well, redemption comes from when you are constricted, when you are enslaved. So what is this redemption coming from? Charity. Now listen to this fascinating Gemara as it continues. Hu haya omer, the same teacher of Yehuda taught, Asara devarim kashim nivra boinim. There are 10 things that are very, 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 very hard. Hard. Like this table. What are very, very hard things in the world? Tells us the following. Har kashe. Sure. One of the first things very hard is a mountain. Mountain's pretty hard. But how do you deal with a hard mountain? Barzel machatcha, take some iron and you can make a hammer or a chisel. Okay, cool. So the chisel counters the mountain. Barzel kashe. But now, what's harder than some iron? What do you think? Fire. Ur mifapafo. Ur kashe. Now you got some heavy duty fire. That's going to melt down the iron. That's even harder. That's more powerful than iron. What's going to overcome the fire? Water, of course. Sounds maybe like the Pesach Seder, yeah? Right at the end of Haggadah. Mayim kashim, then you have water. What is going to overcome the water? Avim, soy b'moisoy, the clouds suck it up to the air. Avim kashim, now you got some heavy-duty clouds. Ruach mefazratan, the wind comes to scatter it. Ruach kashe, some heavy winds. Guf soivloi. I mean, why you have to go through all of this is besides me at this point in time. Really comes to the end principle. And maybe you can be asking yourself the same question. Why do you have to go through all of these 10? Can't they just get to the point already? A ruach kashe, heavy wind, the body is able to hold force. What does that mean? Guf kashe, a heavy body or strong body. Hachad shoivroi, fear can overcome the body, can break the body. Hachad kashe, fear. Some wine will do the job, maybe tequila, today's day and age. Yain kashe, now what overcomes the wine? Sheina mefachtoy. Sleep. You want to get over your hangover, you want to get over feeling too drunk, go sleep. You wake up, you'll feel a bit better. Umise kashe mekulam. Now, that is a strange outcome here. What happened to the whole pattern here? What happened to overcoming sleep? Maybe coffee, it doesn't say that. It says death. You want to go through all of these hectic things, the winds, the iron, the mountains, the wind, whatever you want to deal with. The worst of them all is death. How do you overcome death? What are you meant to do? People spending their lives and fortunes trying to overcome death and live longer. How do you overcome death? Well, my friends, the answer is in the Gemara. There is a way to overcome death. You know what it is? Tzedakah metzaleles mina misa. Tzedakah will save from death. Tzedakah tatzom emaves. Charity saves from death. Interesting. Charity saves from death. What does that mean?
This whole thing started with like climbing a mountain.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, here. Why don't hike? Yes, yes. Well, you didn't, it did cover the avenues of sleep as well. Maybe don't even sleep. All of these dangerous aspects here. But how it concludes, give charity. That's the message. Out of all this journey that we went off, give charity and you'll save yourself from death. And not only that, because death is the worst, charity will save from them all. What's going on here, my friends? Let's try and understand what's happening here. So if we were to come to the next source, number 2, we're going to discover something very unique. Listen to this teaching from the Chidushei Agados, which is the Maharal. The Maharal says, "V'kasher tisboinen b'zeh, hinei guf ha'ilan karov el ha'ikar, u'min hashoresh misparnes ha'ilan." If you imagine a tree. Now, I want you to consider which is the most vital or the most filled with vitality part of the tree. What would you say? The roots? Nice. The roots would probably be the source where everything flows through. And then after the roots, what would you say? The trunk, yeah? Or the lower the trunk is, the more vitality. Listen to this analogy. The Maharal says, the tree stems off into all different fruits and all different branches that give energy to the leaves to the extremity of the tree. But tamid mi shu karov el haguf ha'ilan, a person who is closer to the body of the tree, mimeno ba haparnasa el acher. He becomes or she becomes the source of energy, the vitality that everything flows through to the rest of the tree. Or the fichach. Mishu mefarnes mashpia parnasa el acher, miskarev el ha'ikar. This is what the Maharal says. A person who is involved in facilitating life for others, in building energy in the world around them through their energy that you spoke about, Jesse, is an individual that comes closest to their source. They come close to what is referred to as the ikar, the source, the foundation. And a person who is the opposite of which, who holds everything onto themselves, is a person who is as distant as possible from the essence and the source of who they are. Okay, that's this analogy that the Maharal brings. The more a person is involved in being a source and a conduit of positive blessing and energy and sustaining the vitality around them, the more they become connected to their inner vitality. Vice versa, the more closed off a person is and focused only on themselves, the more detached a person comes from their vitality. Does this make sense so far? Listen to this unbelievable teaching from Eruvin. So there was a machlokes. Now, if I was to ask you, my friends, life is good, but what is better? Now, please do not get any adverse ideas from this. But if an individual was to consider what is more pleasant, being alive or not? Pretty hectic question. But the Gemara brings this question, into which there was 2.5 years, in fact, where there was an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And they would argue and say, Noach loy la'adam shaloi nivra yoyse mishenivra. This was the argument. It is more pleasant for a person to have not have been created than to have been created. We are already alive, so we can't choose. But if a person had a choice to be created or not, what's more pleasant? Yes, you have moments in your life, you have the sun shining on your face, you can sleep in your bed, you can go walking along the promenade, you can have a nice, hot and warm, beautiful bath with some lavender, whatever you want to do. But in the totality of existence, what is easier? To be alive or to not be alive? I'm not saying what's more fulfilling and what's more exciting, but what's easier? Not to be alive? There was an argument between Beis Shammai that said, for sure, no. Better to not be alive. And Beis Hillel came along and said, no, better to be alive. This was the argument, 2.5 years. How they were arguing? Yes, no, for 2.5 years. I don't know what they were saying. But can you believe who the winner was? Nimnu v'gamru. They voted. And they came to the conclusion. Noyach loy la'adam shalei nivra yosef v'shenivra. It is better and more pleasant for a person to have not have been created than to have been created. Big question as to why anyone celebrates their birthday. There should be mourning on their birthday. It should be a time of mourning, of sorrow. You lock yourself up in the room. Don't speak to anyone. If you have a cake, put poison in the cake. It's not a happy day. But I want to tell you a teaching from the Bluzhev Rebbe. The Bluzhev Rebbe says like this. Now, the Bluzhev Rebbe, his grandfather, or he himself actually, went through the Holocaust and survived the Holocaust. And his entire message during the Holocaust was to look after the people there. It's a famous story of the Bluzhev Rebbe being told to jump over a pit where everyone was falling into. And there was another Jew with him. And no one could make the jump. And they thought they were going to die. The Bluzhev Rebbe held his hand. He said, jump with me. And that together jumped over this pit and survived. Now, the Bluzhev Rebbe said about this teaching, you have to look at the extraneous word here. Can you find what the extraneous word is in this teaching? Noyach loy la'adam shaloi nivra yosef mishenivra. It is more pleasant to loy, le adam, to man, to not have been created than to have been created. You know what the Bluzhev Rebbe points out? Do you know which word is superfluous here? The word loy. What does loy mean? To him. It could have easily said in the verse, Noyach la'adam, which means it's pleasant for man, shaloi nivra yosef mishenivra, to have not been created than to have been created. Why does it say it's pleasant to him, to man, to have not been created than to have been created? You know what the Bluzhev Rebbe says? It's only when a person lives for themselves does life become unbearable. When their entire focus is themselves and what they want to do, and they're not conscious of the totality or something more than them and engaging with something bigger and building something bigger, then life becomes unbearable. Question is why? Why is that the case? Now we're going to skip this one. We'll throw in this one just down the bottom. It says a day that a Jew does not do an act of kindness is not considered a day in their life. Okay, very similar to the Bluzhev Rebbe's teaching. This was from Rav Moshe Kobrin. If a person doesn't do one act of charity, or one act of tzedakah, or one act of kindness in their day, it's not considered a day. What does this mean? So this next Gemara tells us an unbelievable teaching. And this teaching really, we're not going to go through the entirety of the Gemara, but it tells us about two very, very righteous individuals that were captured by the Romans, and both were awaiting their death. One individual says, praiseworthy are you. He says, how amazing are you that you were engaged in your life studying Torah. You were the biggest teacher of Torah, he says. And the other guy says to him, 1 second. You were the biggest. And not only were you the biggest, you are going to be saved, he says. What is the merit that you have that will save you? You engaged in Torah and Tzedakah. You didn't just engage in Torah. Again, we see this principle. Now, I want you to consider, what is spirituality? An individual who is engaged their entire life with spiritual growth, with learning, with teaching, with development, but they don't ever engage with charity, is an individual that we see is not given the merit to be able to survive, that the Romans eventually killed this individual. I remember hearing from one of my rabbis, Rav Berkovitz, who is one of the most unbelievable energy forces into this world from a Torah perspective. It's the Rosh Hashiva of Aish. He has a koilel called Jerusalem Koilel. He was given a moment in his life where he thought he was going to die. And he was waiting for the diagnosis from the doctors. And he remembers sitting in the waiting room and thinking, what merit does he have to survive? What merit does he have to be alive? And you know what his deduction was? After all of the teaching that he could teach, out of all of the elements that he could do in this world of building Torah, his deduction was one thing. He was alive helping other people. In his helping of other people, that was his merit to survive. Now again, let's try and understand this. Okay, this is where we're going to come into the depth of understanding what is behind this particular mitzvah. Let's read this source together. This source is from the teachings of the Kutei Halachas. It's source number 6. He writes, Zeh bechinas tzedakah koidem tefillah. There's a requirement to ideally give charity prior to prayer. That's why when women light candles, they give a little bit of charity. That's generally where the pushka is held and all the rattly elements are placed into. But here as well, prior to a person davening in the morning, they go and they place some money in the pushka. Why? Ki tzedakah mesakein hamamon. He writes, because charity fixes up money. What? Charity fixes up money? What does that mean that charity fixes up money? Kemuva b'divrei Rabbeinu, as is taught by Rabbi Nachman, v'tikun ha'mamon hu shelo yeh ha'mamon b'chinas marbe nechasim marbe daiga. Key verse. The danger of money is a dangerous curse associated. You know what the curse is? The more a person has, the more they worry. This is a Mishnah in Avos. It says the more property and the more money a person has, the more worry. Seems like the opposite, no? You would think the more a person has, less they worry, the more they can have to support themselves, the more they can have to buffer their life. Why? Because he says this. Worry comes from something called bechinas pizur hanefesh. What's pizur hanefesh? Pizur means a scattering of one's soul. That's where worry comes from. Again, we're thinking worry comes from fear and circumstances of life. He says no. Worry comes from something called pizur hanefesh, the scattered elements of one's soul. When one's soul becomes scattered. What happens is a person's entire life is destroyed because of money, and it kills them. Charity comes to save a person. Why? It takes the foreign elements of self that has become trapped by the money, by the pizur. We haven't defined yet what causes this scattered soul. As we saw initially in the first time, that in our first source, that charity comes to redeem all of those who are exiled. What charity does is it fixes up and creates something called wealth of holiness. The ikar tikkun hashiros the kedusha, and the main wealth of holiness, shebechinas achdus hefech mar ben achasim. Listen to this word. The way to fix up dangerous wealth, dangerous ownership and property is something called achdus. What's achdus mean? Oneness. What did we say was associated with success and financial gain? More is something called scattered self. What is this scattered self? What is this oneness? Hefech mar ben achasim. V'alkein natzani tzarga zkonim etzfilah takin shoshin avashiyeh b'chines echad v'azay yicholim nespalel b'chines kulei echad kulei toiv. What we're seeing from this source is the nature of a person. The nature of a person is not only their desire to consume pleasurable things and engage with pleasurable activities. The nature of a person we see is their desire to expand. As we know, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch taught famously that the energy of happiness, simcha, comes from the word smicha, to expand or to sprout. Sas, joy, comes from the word tzatz, to grow or sprout out. The nature of a human being is they constantly want to sprout out. They constantly want to expand. How does one expand? Well, I can use my money to travel, can use my money to consume, I can use my money to amass. These are all aspects of expansion. But not only can I use my money for those things, I can look at my bank account and I can see, and I heard this from a very wealthy individual who told me that they became subsumed by the curse of number up. What is number up? When they looked at their bank account and the number was going up, they were happy. When it wasn't going up, not happy. When they looked at their social status and it was going up, happy. When it wasn't going up, unhappy. Complete extrinsic dependency on number up. Arrow up, then they're happy. And this we see is the danger of marbe nechasim. What is marbe nechasim? What is the effect of having more do for a person? Well, we saw that in the Mishnah. If you have a look at the next Mishnah, the Mishnah in Avos tells us, marbe nechasim marbe daiga. What do we say? The more property a person has, the more anxiety. Again, let me ask you here, why? Why do they have more anxiety? More to lose, okay? Anything else? More responsibility. What am I going to do with this? So what is brought down is, in fact, the danger of marbe nechasim is not only the fear of losing, and I remember hearing again from another individual who made a large quantum at an early age, and they said that they spent the rest of their life having to feel like they needed to protect it, and it was as if it was like a castle, a sandcastle with the waves, and they didn't know what to do, so they were spending their entire life in a state of fear. What am I going to do? How am I going to protect this? So the fear of loss or the fear of not utilizing it to the fullest. But what the Kabbalists bring here is that the danger of marbe nechasim is not the element of more, that I have all of this. The danger of marbe nechasim is that I start to depend on defining myself by this more. That I now am defined by what I have. I am my appearance, I am what I wear, I am what I drive, and I am the successful entity that I've created and the continual creation of that success. Now, the more something is gravitationally growing, it's pulling you along with it. The more this entity is so big, Gewalt. I mean, you have to just look in the streets. I don't know if you've ever been on that highway. What's the highway to the airport? The N2? You look on the N2 where all the shanty towns are. Now, again, this is just a superficial judgment, and I'll probably be accosted for this. But nevertheless, I often am very much struck when I see the people, and I've actually gone into Kailicha myself. I've gone on a tour. And you look at the kids playing on the side of the road. Nothing to lose. Just this lightness of experience. Again, very arduous, very difficult lives, I'm sure. But the energy, and I remember feeling the energy in that environment in Kailicha, felt, again, afraid that I might be shot in the head any second, and there was a hijacked car that was found right next to us while we were on the tour. But the energy I felt from the people was this lightness. And you find in a different framework, come into Sea Point, come into another environment, and you see these individuals heavy. This fear, this concern. Where does this fear and concern come from? It's definitely because they're Jewish. That's one reality. But an additional element of concern is that we become subsumed by our definition of what we have amassed. And what we're afraid of is losing the definition of ourselves that has become dependent on these entities. And this is why the Mishnah tells us the more you have, the more you're going to have anxiety. Because anxiety stems from the fact or the fear of losing. Now, what are you losing? What are you losing? Famous story of a billionaire that lost, he had 100 billion and lost 10. They found him as a German billionaire, ended up committing suicide on train tracks. If you look at the quantum again, any individual given that would think, unbelievable, I've made it, my life is unbelievable. What happened to him? What changed? Okay, you lost a bit. What had changed is his definition of self had become so dependent on this that not only did he lose the 10 billion, he lost a limb. He lost a big proportion of his essence because his essence was defined by that, which was external to him. And that's why it says, Mar Tzedakah, which is the end of that Mishnah, the more a person gives, the more peace. Well, what peace are we talking about? Peace in the world? When I give to people, everyone is happy, everyone's sorted out, peace in oneself. And that is what Rabbi Nachman was saying here. Rabbi Nachman was saying you must give charity before you daven to tap into the oneness and not tap into the frazzleness of your soul. Because the frazzle of one's soul is this desire to constantly expand, make more, achieve more, do more, attain more. And the more a person becomes subsumed in that, the further away from their shore of self they become. Now we're going to see the Ben Yehoyada here. Now, Ben Yehoyada, we're coming to two final sources here. But before we look at them, are there any questions or comments? So if we look at this initial source that we saw that said, what saves from death is charity. How is it saving from death? Well, what death is not feeling any vitality in self. Death is the inability to feel a sense of inner aliveness. As we know, famously, the Vilna Gaon pointed out two of the most opposite words. What are the two most opposite words? He says, the first word is the word for God's wrath. The word for God's wrath is a word called chamati. Have you heard of that word? Chamati, God's wrath. I don't have it in here. Now he says the opposite word for this is the word machatzit. What does the word machatzit mean? Half, chetzi. Now it comes from the machatzit ha-shekel, one of the first times that the Jewish people were given the opportunity to give charity. What did they do? They gave it to the temple. They each had to bring half a shekel coin. Now listen to what he points out, unbelievable Kabbalistic insight into these words. He says, if you take the word chamati and you take the letters on the outside of chamati, the first letter is a chet, the last letter is a yud. What does a chet and a yud spell? Chai. What's chai mean? Alive. What's the inner letters of the word chamati, God's wrath? Mem and taf. What does that smell? Met. So on the energy force associated with God's wrath is living on the outside, but dead on the in. I've got all of my externalities in check, but I have nothing of my intrinsic self and spiritual identity in effect. On the opposite, you look at the word machatzit. Machatzit is the exact opposite. If you look at this word associated with charity, you see that the letter mem is then on the outside flanked with the letter taf, which spells met, On the inside of those two, chet and yud spells chai, and what's on the center of that word? A tzaddik. Tzaddik represents the word tzedakah. When a person comes into the energy force that we've seen here of not relying on the externality of self, on the amassment, on number up, they discover something internal and intrinsic to who they are. Now, the question is how you do this, because it's unbelievably difficult. If a person thinks that, you know what, I'm just going to give a little bit of charity and that's going to be enough to solve the fundamental issue of what I've amassed, I still define myself by that to a very big extent. So listen to this final two sources. This is from the Ben Yoada. The Ben Yoada brings, based on a verse in Mishlei. And the verse in Mishlei tells us that a person who works the earth will be satiated from their bread. Okay? He's going to introduce one of the most important words into our lives. Listen to this word. It says, "My dichsiv," we're in source number 8. "Oived admasa yispa lechem," a person who works the earth will be satiated from their bread. If you make yourself like a servant to the earth, yispa lechem, the bread will satiate you. Vim lav, lo yispa lechem. Then, if you're not, then you won't be satiated. That's from Mishlei Yud Beis Yud Aleph. Listen to his words. Nirali, b'siyata d'shmaya, im yesh la'adam tu gvoiros taiva, lo yispa lechem. If a person lives within the energy force of desire again may be pleasure, may be expansion within success, they will never be able to be satiated with their bread. Dim yesh lo mana roitze ma'atayim. Famous statement. If a person has 100, they want 200. When is it enough? I don't know if anyone has ever defined that for themselves. When is it enough money? Can anyone come to a conclusion of what is enough? How much? Phil, what's your quantum there? Okay, but what's your subjective quantum? Maybe we can help you out there. We can put some funds together. What do you say, Phil? How much? It's a difficult thing to come to. I mean, even on a subjective level, what does a person need? What does a person say? Then you say, if I got this, I got enough. You think anyone will ever be able to say, if I got this, I would have enough? Yeah? They say it until they start living it. And then they realize, you know what? Someone else has more than me. You know what? I don't feel like I have enough. This is not giving me what I have. You find that by the people that have done studies on the individuals that have won the lotto. And they find themselves in the same position that they were. They just spent it. They never had the ability to say, what I have now is enough. Let me, again, Steve will often tell us, to put some money away. But they couldn't. Why? Why? Because it's not enough. And listen to what he says here. Because there is a curse. The curse is if a person has 100, they never feel like that 100 is enough. They come to 200. Once they get to 200, they want 400. This is what we want to get to in life. Success, as we know, a person who is happy is a person who is happy with their lot. How on earth do you feel happiness with your lot? You have to have a key energy force called histapkus. What's histapkus? Histapkus means enoughness. You have to live with something called enough. Enough. I'm happy. Enough. Not enough like enough. As the forefathers were given the blessing of bakol mikol kol. Total everythingness. While Esav comes to Yaakov and he says, Yeshli Rav, I have a lot. I have so much, as opposed to my enoughness. Histapkus is one of the greatest gifts that a person can have. That's the energy of enough. Now, how do you feel enough? What do you need to do to feel enough? We said it's not a number. A person is not going to get to say, you know what, 500 million, enough. What happens when you start living within that framework and you start to realize maybe the jet is not, fast enough or nice enough. Maybe the, island is not the exact type of weather I want. I mean, what is enough? So he says, the secret to enough, even though his premises it by saying, histapkos kashemoid, it's unbelievably, I mean, they should have added it to the list at the beginning, one of the greatest and most difficult elements is enough. He says, kifi ateva, according to a person's nature, etzel adam, kifi tivoy, umazget tzarech lachapes tivoy, a person really has to force themselves into feeling enough. V'da aka, aval im hu aved la'acherim adaraba, midas histapkos hi etzloi tivis. He says one fundamental principle exists. If your mindset is that you are a servant to others, that my life is not about me, my mindset is what resources do I need to facilitate blessing and growth and goodness in this world? If that is my mindset, I am able to then have the key to access the treasure called enough. I'm just telling you what he says so far. The kol ma shikna eved kana rabbi, because there's a principle. Anything that a servant is able to access or acquire goes directly to their master. That's the principle. If you have a servant, not that we have slaves today. If you have a slave, back in the day, whatever they found goes directly to their master. So the mindset that a person is able to instill themselves to be able to access enough is the mindset that whatever I have belongs to my master. It's not mine. It's not me. It's not who I am. If I have 100, why do I need 200 if it's not mine? It's only when I think, 100. Now I can make 100 into 200. No. If I come along and say, my master's gained this 100, I don't care if it turns into 200, it's his. So I'm not going to go looking for another, So that's what he says is the secret here. It's not mine. This world is referred to as the earth, the Adama. And if a person makes themselves like an eved, like a servant to the Adama, not that you are serving the earth. It's not like you're coming down and kissing the earth, maybe in Israel. But here what we are saying is that your relationship to the earth is one of a servant. That's when you are going to feel a sense of satiation. When you realize nothing is mine. Everything I amass is all for you, Hashem. Everything I amass is just as a conduit to be able to develop what is and should be potentially in this world that I can facilitate. Now, if I don't get it, try. But what I have, I'm not defined by. As the king once sent his servants out to find the happiest man alive. And they looked all around and all they could find was an individual who was homeless on the street. All he had was a jacket. So the king called him and he says, why are you so happy? You got nothing. He says, that's primarily why I'm so happy. He said, nothing to lose. So he asked him, he says, what's the secret for me? I'm the king. I have so much. What am I meant to do? He says, if you relinquish everything that you have, then you'll be happy. If a person lets go and says, none of this is me, none of this is mine, all of this is completely there to facilitate whatever Hashem wants in the world. Now, again, it's not meaning that you're going to be stupid and give everything away and then you can't eat and you can't have clothing, and you can't look after yourself to facilitate what you need to do. I'm not saying that. But what we're saying is that the energy of charity is teaching us that what we have is not ours. What we are is not dependent on our money and not dependent on this concept of more and success, that when I'm able to stab at that and I'm able to poke a hole in it and open up and say, look, I can see you through whatever this entity or number is. I open it up by giving it away. through that, I'm able to find myself on the other side. This is how he concludes. Look at the last paragraph there. Nearly b'siyata d'shmaya hakavani ma'adam yesh lo yisadeh lo yachshav shi shaloi v'oisek ba ela choshev shi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you have a field, he says, honing in on this concept, realize that it's not yours, that everything you are working is for Hashem. You're working in your master's field. Then you'll be satiated. Now, if you're going to recognize, gosh, I'm doing this for my master, then the master is going to give you more flow of energy into your life. Okay, he goes into the Kabbalistic aspect of the numerical value of these things. And there you see the verse actually from Mishlei that I brought here, as it says, he who tills his land shall have plenty and food, but he who pursues vanities is devoid of sense. That's not the exact translation of the verse. It says, Oived admosai yispa lechem, person who is a servant in the framework of land, which is working in the land, then they will be satiated. But a person who is chasing after vanities, which we represented by this perception of expansion, perception of, the thrills of self, then they're going to feel a sense of lacking. Now, to conclude with the final source here. This source brings us this energy, as it says, Ki ein Adam meis v'chetzi tavose biyade. This is from the Koheles Rabbah. That means that a person doesn't die with half of their desires being satiated. So what we are learning here is that this desire to expand in ourselves, which also flows into our desire to experience the world around us. It's a necessity that a person feels, I want to expand. Now, it's good to experience the world and enjoy the world. But the danger of engaging with those aspects is if one falls into the definition of those elements, that they now become dependent and defined by those elements, is that they get drawn out by that tide and they lose their stability of self. The energy of tzedakah comes along to revive a person's essential state of feeling alive. When they take their resources, not only are they coming along and saying, this does not define me, but what they're coming along is to redefine the money, as we saw from Rabbi Nosson. He says that you are redefining, you are fixing up the money. How do you fix up the money? This sounds like, cleaning the money. You are cleaning the money. This is cleaning the money. How do you clean money in Judaism? You don't set up some dry cleaners or do whatever you need to do. The way to clean the money is charity. I know it affects your tax deductible abilities, but that's not what we mean here. Cleaning up the money is our ability to say what I own is not mine. As soon as, and that's what you said initially, the difficulty to let go of this is mine. It's mine. I made it. I got it. It's in my name. Why should I give it to anyone else? And that's the trap. It's not saying don't have money. It's not saying don't be successful. It's just saying don't be defined by that. Don't undermine yourself by that. You are much more than that. Because once you find your essence, then you won't feel the sense of anxiety. Once you're able to reappropriate all that you have to the recognition that it's all as if you are a servant to the master, then I'm able to let go and live in a life and in a world where I'm subservient, I'm nullified, and I just live in my infinite self. So please God, my friends, Hashem should bless us with lots of money, lots of success, lots of bracha. But the biggest bracha and the biggest blessing is our ability to be conduits of energy to others. And in that conduit of energy to others, the recognition that we are completely servants to the creator of all, that is the field that we are living on and working. And in that, coming to the greatest recognition that we're not defined by it. The greatest recognition that the essence of what we have inside of us can never be taken away from us. There's never something that can be lost because it's always there. Our infinite self is always there. So please, God, should be with bracha. Any questions, comments, statements? Anyone want to throw something? Anyone at home? Does this make sense to you, everyone that is here? Make sense? Okay, good. I'm glad. Thank you. Bye-bye now.